Welcome to this general election debate in the race for Public Advocate of New York. I'm Errol Lewis, political anchor here at Spectrum News New York 1, and we're bringing you this debate in partnership with the New York City Campaign Finance Board and the nonprofit news organization The City, as well as the Citizens Union, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, the Columbia School of Social Work, and the Latino Leadership Institute. We're here because New Yorkers in all 5 boroughs will begin casting ballots for a long list of races, including Public Advocate, this Saturday. That's when early voting begins, with Election Day itself to follow on Tuesday, November 2nd. Now, over the next hour, you'll hear from the 2 major party candidates running for this citywide office. The position is currently held by Jumaane Williams, a Democrat. He is being challenged by Dr. Devi Nampi-Parampil, a Republican. We're excited to have both candidates here in our studios. We've done many remote debates since the pandemic began, but this will be our first in-person debate in 2 years, with precautions, including candidates who showed us proof of vaccination. Let's start with a brief rundown of what the Public Advocate does. The Public Advocate of New York City is a citywide position created in 1993. It is intended to serve as the voice for the public. It is first in line of succession to the mayor, meaning that if the mayor should die, resign, or be removed from office, the Public Advocate automatically becomes mayor until a special election can be held. The Public Advocate presides over city council meetings and can introduce legislation in the council. He or she can also analyze city services and, where appropriate, initiate or join lawsuits. And the Public Advocate is intended to serve as a voice for the people, a way for the concerns of New Yorkers to be heard at the highest levels of city government. Here are the rules that have been agreed to by both candidates. Each candidate will have 45 seconds to deliver an opening statement, and then answers to my questions will generally be limited to 60 seconds with a chance for short rebuttals. Each candidate will get to ask their opponent a question, and there will be a lightning round where candidates will give short answers, usually yes or no. You can see this full debate on ny1.com or on the Spectrum News app at any time. And remember to join the conversation online using the hashtag NY1Politics. And now on to opening statements. The order for tonight's opening statements was determined by a random drawing. Jumaane Williams will go first. Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you, Errol. Thank you, New York 1, for hosting this debate. Thank you, Dr. Devi, for joining us in this important conversation. I've been an advocate my entire life, and I'm proud to have brought my experiences as an organizer and a legislator to the role of public advocate. Since my time in office, we've completely restructured it. We've redefined the scope of what it can do. We've had some tough fights, and we've won some tough victories. We have met people where they are and provided the assistance that they needed. Working with my colleagues, I'm proud to have passed almost as many bills as all of my predecessors combined. And so I know that we can't return to normal post-pandemic because it didn't work for most of us. And as your public advocate and your Democratic nominee, I know the type of progressive leadership we need right now. Part of the work we've done, we have a lot more work to do. And if you can vote for me on November 2nd to re-elect me, I'll be so proud to continue that work.
Okay, thank you. Now on to Dr. Devi Nampi-Parampil.
In New York's darkest hour, the city failed in its duties. Individual New Yorkers struggled to care for their neighbors. My toddler was separated from us for 8 months so that me and my unborn baby could take care of patients. When she returned to us, we were all infected with COVID, and my husband was hospitalized. When I called the city for help because I was having contractions, the city worker responded that it was an unsafe situation and that she might call Child Protective Services. Even when I was in labor, and even hours after I had my C-section, I took care of patients virtually from my COVID isolation room. I will protect the powerless, as this administration has failed to do.
Okay, thank you, candidates. I want to start with the first and perhaps most important issue in the race. The public advocate is first in line, as I mentioned, to become mayor in the event that the mayor should die or become incapacitated or resign, something that has happened 3 times since the city was consolidated in 1898. That means that voters have to consider whether you as candidates are not only ready to become public advocate, but to govern the entire city under what would almost by definition be emergency circumstances. So the question is, what part of your experience should lead New Yorkers to believe that you could handle the complex job of serving as mayor of New York in an emergency? Let's start with you, Dr. Devi.
So I have a career of speaking up for fairness and for protecting the powerless. I have been a doctor for almost 20 years, a scientific researcher for 25. And early in my career, I noticed that Black patients were being treated significantly differently, worse than white patients. So I stood up for that, I corrected that, I addressed it, and I have a study to prove it. Then later, as I progressed through my career, I stood up for people with disabilities, not just individually as patients, but also to improve their entry into medical school. And ultimately, I started working at the VA and became the chief of their pain management program for the tri-state area. So I have dealt with federal bureaucracies, and I have started new programs within there where this was before the opioid crisis was even identified. I blunted that opioid crisis. I fought with drug dealers who hid behind patient privacy laws. So I am used to dealing with dangerous and challenging situations and all sorts of characters. And I have succeeded both in public life and in private life.
Okay. And for you, Jumaane?
It's a very important question. I'm proud of the work that I've done in almost a decade, or a little more than a decade actually, as an elected official, first as a member of the legislature, and now as a executive member in a citywide office. I'm proud of the work we've done in passing the 80 to 90 billion dollar budgets. I understand how the budget works, which is the most important thing. I'm proud of the bills that we've gotten passed. We're up to almost about 68 working with the City Council. I'm proud of understanding the difference between the budget, the bills, and then policy that is attached to those bills, and really figuring out how to use those tools to move the city forward. And so a lot of people see me in the streets raising my voice because that's an important tool, but those other tools are important as well. And it's important to know how you can use them, what buttons you need to push to make sure that New Yorkers are safe and to make sure they're living their lives the best they can, and that government is doing that.
Is there an operational plan locked away in a safe someplace about, what to do if the moment comes where a public advocate has to step up and become mayor?
I haven't seen one, but it's something that we think about on a regular basis. It's something we've thought about since we became public advocate. I didn't run for the job of mayor. I ran for the job of public advocate, and I'm very proud of that job. But we know we have to be ready at a moment's notice to become mayor. We've actually tried to figure out what we can do if the mayor is out for 9 days, because we have some additional powers that come into place. And so we have some contingency plans that we've put together, and we're ready.
Okay. Yes.
Well, now you had mentioned safety, but I would say that the city has actually become significantly unsafe during this time. Now, shootings and murders have doubled during this time that you've been in office as public advocate. And what I would argue, even today, we're seeing that protesters are accusing the police of police brutality. Now, people have strong opinions on both sides, some in favor of the police, some in favor of the protesters. But either way, most people would argue that the police need significantly more training, maybe implicit bias training and other training to reduce those types of incidents. But you have argued, you've championed a movement for defunding the police, which would actually decrease the training, decrease the resources they have for clerical support to expedite cases, expedite processing.
We'll have a longer period to talk about that, but you can give a quick response if you'd like.
Sure. One, I don't think we should force New Yorkers to choose sides. What I think we should do is have a better understanding of what public safety is, what police's role is in that, and what everyone else's role is. And I would say during the pandemic, across the country, violence has gone up, so we can't ignore that. But if we're going to say that the policies have caused that, then we also have to credit those policies from when we went to 2009 to the safest we'd ever been in 2018 and 2019, which are the numbers we now reference. And so what we're saying, we should continue what worked and not go back 30 years to do the wrong thing again.
Okay, you know what? Let me move to a different topic, which is politics, and then we'll have our cross-examination round. You guys can get into it directly. I wanted to ask a political question because it's front and center, and I wanted to start with you, Jumaane Williams. You're actively considering running for governor next year. Isn't it, in some sense, unfair for voters to not have a sense of whether the vote that they cast in the next couple of weeks is going to be followed by you running for an entirely different office?
Well, let's be 100% clear. I'm running for re-election for the Public Advocate's office. I'm proud of that work that we've done. I'm so honored to have that, to have this position. I'm asking for the re-election. As you know, the calendar is something we can't do anything about. And so I'm caught between having to make decisions at the same time. I think it would be dereliction of duty not to say I'm even going to explore a position that actually has more tools than I have now to do the things I'm actually advocating for. What was most important to me is honesty and integrity. And so I wanted the voters to understand that this is something I'm actually very seriously considering, so they can think about that when they're going to the voting booth. But I want to be clear, I'm running for re-election for public advocate.
This is not about the calendar, it's about focus on the public advocate position and on New Yorkers. So the New Yorkers deserve someone who is focused on crime, the economy, the issues that are specific to New York City. If you're running for governor, there's also the fact that you would be distracted campaigning for governor. And then the cost to the taxpayers. I mean, there's the cost of the voter guide itself, which is millions of dollars in postage, the cost of matching funds, which you received $1 million in matching funds, which is that being used to campaign for New York City residents, or is that being used for this governor's race? But either way, if we have another election a year from now, because the governor's race is in 2022, that will cost New Yorkers also millions of dollars. Now, how many mouths would that feed? How many homeless people would that take care of? How many medallions would that buy for these taxi drivers?
Well, the governor's race is going to move forward either way, so it's going to cost money. I have experience in actually walking and chewing gum. So when I was a council member, I ran for a public advocate. I was happy to have passed my 68th piece of legislation. We got a lot of things in the budget, and I'm happy now, and I can tell folks to go to advocate.nyc.gov. You can see the reports that we've gotten done that help move the needle, the 14 pieces of legislation that we've passed, and all the things that we've already done. We're going to stay focused on that. But as I mentioned, it will be dereliction not to entertain getting the tools needed to do the things that I'm advocating for. And so I've been honest with the voters about that.
Okay.
Now, even that...
I have a question for you, Dr. Devi. Over the last 5 years, most Republicans in New York strongly supported Donald Trump and his policies as president. Overall, do you think he was good for New York City? And I'm wondering if you would accept his endorsement in this race.
Well, overall, in terms of Donald Trump, I think that he has highlighted a big problem that we have in this city, which is corruption across the country. Corruption, I mean, when I think about what's going on, just yesterday, New York City, NYC, and in terms of the Department of Homeless Services, there was something that came out that Aguila, this is a provider that received $250 million in money from contracts, the city contract. So basically, what I noticed is that they declared bankruptcy, and all of a sudden, all of that money and all of those investigations, this Stitch Dames that's investigating them, a lot of it has been put to a halt because people can't look at it anymore once they decided to file for Chapter 11. So I think one thing that he brought out is that we need to look deeper in terms of corruption and what's going on. Where is all this money being hidden? Because when I think about Thrive NYC and other programs that we've had in New York City, we should be aggressively looking to see where is this corruption, where's the bureaucracy hiding all of these lost funds, and what's happening to New Yorkers. In terms of accepting an endorsement, I'll accept an endorsement from anyone. I've accepted endorsements from people who like Trump. I've accepted endorsements from socialists as well. So there are a lot of people that support my campaign because I've been arguing for fairness, transparency, and predictability, which I think everybody can agree on, regardless of their political beliefs.
Do you think Joe Biden was the rightful winner of the presidential election last year?
Yes.
Okay. Let's move on to our cross-examination round, something that I know you were interested in. This is when each candidate gets a chance to ask one question of their rival. We're going to start with you, Jumaane Williams.
Dr. Devi, the Department of Health just this morning said that racism is now a public health issue, which I think is just a great declaration. I'd just like to know, as a physician, what you've done on the ground to help with this issue and what you would do as public advocate.
Well, as I mentioned, that was one of the first studies that I ever got involved with, addressing racism in the pain management area. So that was back in the 90s before people even really looked at this. And since then, I have taught generations of students, residents, trainees about how there are health disparities that we need to address for not just race, although that was primarily that, but also in terms of income. Now, if I was elected to this position, then I would address this even further, not just in healthcare, but in all aspects of society. We have to look at this. Fairness is the most important thing to me in my platform. So yes, I agree it's a public health issue, but it is something that we need to look at in all aspects of our society.
Okay, your turn to ask a question, Dr. Debbie.
So I had started talking about this with Thrive NYC, that this is something that most people agree about $1 billion has been missing from the city's budget. And it's unclear, is it missing or was it spent and unaccounted for? But can you explain what you've done as public advocate to look to see what happened with the Thrive NYC program? And for those who don't know, this is a program that was supposed to help address homelessness and mental health. But both of those situations have gotten worse on your watch.
Yes, and just to be clear, it was primarily about mental health. Homelessness came in because chronic homeless people are suffering with mental health. One, I agree with you, and we've been very vocal about the failures of Thrive NYC from the beginning. You can go back and look at hearings where I've really questioned the people who are running that, what is happening with that money and what we've accomplished. What I'll be able to say is that we didn't accomplish what we should have with $1 billion. We've been calling that out. The one thing that we were able to do is elevate the conversation about mental health, which I think is good, but it definitely wasn't worth $1 billion. So we put out our own report, and you can check that on advocate.nyc.gov on mental health, how the city should be responding. Thankfully, they are starting to take some of the things that we put in there, but there's such a long way to go. And I agree with you. I'm not happy about Thrive NYC. I'm definitely not happy about the $1 billion. I've been saying that all throughout, and I'll continue to say that. And we're going to continue to push this if the voters elect me for another term.
But that still doesn't answer my question about where the money actually went, because it's still not clear. We haven't gotten the results. Okay, still we could know where the money was spent and maybe it wasn't effective, but it's still not clear here. Did it go to hospitals and healthcare services and the services were ineffective? Did it go to medications for patients? Did it go to some type of housing for them so that they could be in wards where they could get the care that they needed? It's really not clear where did the money go.
I agree 100%. And so we've asked a lot of those questions. It's been rebranded a few times, and each time you rebrand, there's additional questions that's not getting answered. One of the things that we want to get as the public advocate is subpoena power. So when we get the information that we ask for, we do put it on the website. We do put our reports, like in the mental health report that I just referenced. It's difficult to get all of the answers without a subpoena power, without going to court. So we are fighting to get a subpoena power now, but we're going to continue to use all the tools that we have. And 100%, we are in agreement on the failures of Thrive NYC and that $1 billion.
Okay, candidates. It is time for our lightning round, one of two. Each candidate will answer my questions with a brief response, usually yes or no. And I'll start with you, Dr. Devi. Should non-citizens be allowed to vote in local municipal elections?
No.
Mr.
Yes, that right should be restored. It was taken away.
Okay. Jumani Williams, should New Yorkers be allowed to carry concealed firearms?
No.
Dr. Devi.
Yes.
Dr. Devi, should the statue of Thomas Jefferson, which is currently in the City Council chambers, be moved somewhere else?
No.
Mr. Williams.
Yes, the question is, why is it there in the first place?
Mr. Williams, how often do you ride the subway each week?
It's not as much as it used to be, so I don't have a count, probably a couple times a month.
Okay.
Well, you ride with a police escort, but I ride the subway every day.
Okay. Dr. Devi, will congestion pricing be a net positive or a net negative for New York City, in your opinion?
Well, it depends. This has hurt the disabled and the sick significantly and the frontline workers throughout the pandemic. So I'm in favor of things that help with climate change. But overall, I think it hurts the disadvantaged significantly.
Okay. Mr. Williams.
Once we can answer the questions, the sooner we can get it, the more net positive it will be.
Okay. Yesterday, the City Board of Health declared racism to be a public health crisis. Should the city government make fighting racism a priority? Mr. Williams.
We should be leading on that issue because the entire country looks at us.
It should have been a long time ago.
Okay. Dr. Devi, should new police officers be required to live in the 5 boroughs?
They should be, but they should also then have higher pay so they can afford to live in the communities they're assigned to.
Mr. Williams.
The answer is yes. I would say at least 90 to 95%, if not all.
Okay. Do you, Mr. Williams, support efforts to ban new natural gas hookups as a way to lower fossil fuel emissions?
I do, but we have to make sure that the energy that people need are going to be accessible.
Dr. Devi.
I think we have to explore all the options to make, to look at how we can increase jobs and how we can lower the cost of gas and heat for vulnerable New Yorkers. I've seen a lot of people with frostbite injuries.
Okay. And finally, for this round, have you ever ridden a city bike, Dr. Devi?
No.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, candidates. Let's get on to our next question. I want to talk now about public health. Mr. Williams, have been consistently a voice urging caution and restraint throughout the pandemic. You were among the early voices calling for a complete shutdown. More recently, you kept your offices closed and your employees at home, even after Mayor de Blasio called other city employees back to the workplace. Do you now support vaccines as mandatory for public employees? And are any if so, are any employees exempt from that, do you think?
We've been a consistent voice in this. We have supported vaccine mandates. We understand that it works. And that's what's getting us where we need to go. And I want to be clear that this is not new. Unfortunately, the politics has made it seem crazier than it is. We have vaccine mandates in place right now. We're just adding another one so we can save people's lives. There has to be exemptions for things like religious exemptions. All I would say is it should be the same exemptions that exist for the current mandates that we have, like measles, mumps, and rubella.
Okay, Dr. Debbie.
Well, in terms of working from home, first of all, I have been working throughout this entire pandemic, as have my employees for the most part. We've been treating sick patients. Many of us have gotten sick and infected with COVID, as have I. So that was not an option to really work from home, although we could have if we sacrificed the patients, which would have been a death sentence for them at that time. And now with the mandates, although we are all vaccinated, including me, I'm opposed to the mandates, not because I'm against the vaccine, but because I think it is difficult and divisive to New Yorkers. Now, I went to a city council, board of education, or education committee meeting on September 1st. I actually stayed longer than you did to testify at that thing because the public is only allowed to testify at the end. And I foreshadowed that we would have this type of staffing shortage that we're seeing now in all of our key sectors, that we might have supply chain issues. And that's the main reason I'm seeing a problem. It's creating a lot of polarization within our society. It's infringing on people's civil liberties, and they are very upset. And it's creating a lot of divisiveness that we don't need while we're trying to get through this pandemic.
I'm sorry,
when you say infringing on civil liberties, what do you mean by that?
Well, there are a lot of people who believe that they should have control over their own bodies, and I believe that too.
This is probably the only time I may, because this is really important. The only reason it's divisiveness is because people are putting politics into it. We already have vaccine mandates. You are also not allowed to have a civil liberty to run through a red light and kill someone. And so we have to balance that out. The mandates already exist. We have to use them. And we have to making it politically divisive because people's civil liberties also should prevent them from being killed from other people.
Well, so you brought up two things. So first, in terms of mandates, so we have vaccines, which I'm in support of vaccines. I'm a physician that's always supported. I've actually done segments, national news segments, encouraging people to get vaccines. But we've had other vaccines with a lot more track record in terms of looking at the data. But you also mentioned people running red lights. So actually, that brings up another point that I think is very important. We have a very high number of hit and runs in this city, which actually I wanted to ask you about as well. And I wondered, why is that? And I've noticed that, at least talking to police officers, they have mentioned that part of it is because our penalties are so low that if we have a lot of drunk drivers going around on the streets, they're actually favored to run the red lights, leave accidents, and do all of this type of stuff rather than stay and face drunk driving charges. So what have you done to look at the penalties for some of these crimes to see, you know, are we actually catching people who are committing dangerous crimes, or are they better off committing other crimes with lesser penalties?
I'm not sure where we got to, but I just want to be clear that by your example, we're saying that people don't have the right to do certain things that are going to harm other people. And that's the example I was using because I want to make sure we're clear that we don't make this divisive, that we use the platform that we already have in terms of who can be exempt to vaccinate while we put another vaccine mandate, because I want to save lives. And what the problem was at the beginning is that we didn't have clear and concise directions from our leaders on the city, state, and federal level. And that's what's going to save lives. Of course, we have to have enforcement for people who are driving drunk or running red lights. It's very important. and I've supported increased enforcement on those issues.
No, well, actually, so with that, the hit and runs, we haven't investigated that properly. So that's another thing. The penalty for that is too low.
Well, let's stay on public health
but then
right
with
now.
the vaccines, let me just add, saving lives, the number of cases had gone down in terms of deaths and hospitalizations had gone down significantly. That wasn't even being published anymore. So people were talking about the number of cases in terms of the Delta strain without looking at the sensitivity of the test. We had a much better test at that point. We weren't looking at the infectivity in terms of how contagious it is, which is much more different than how dangerous and deadly it was per given case. So the survival rate had already improved at that point. So the time that the mandate was enacted here was a time when New York was already doing much better. So the mandate wasn't as necessary as it might have been a year ago. And in terms of making the vaccine available, I myself offered my office and my employees and everybody else as a place that we could give people vaccines at the start of this pandemic. But let's just say that the city turned us down. This is at a time where everybody was struggling to get the vaccine. The city turned us down after we had to struggle for a week to get onto the website to even volunteer.
I'm glad that we agree the mandate could have been done earlier and would have saved more lives. I'm glad we agree on that. The only thing I will say is that it started to come down because more people got vaccinated, because we started having more concise messages. And the mandate, based on the mandates we already occur, help with that messaging.
I didn't say I was in favor of a mandate earlier. I said a mandate might make sense if the cases were much, much worse, which was at the beginning of the pandemic.
Agreed.
But when things were significantly better, that's not the time also to then do
Dr.
this.
Devi, please, help me understand this. If you're saying that a mandate might have worked earlier on, but that is not necessary at this point, is that where you?
No, I'm just saying that if people, so if you're going to look at things in terms of, you know, that argument that you made, that the deaths are rising and you're trying to save lives, if you're going to use something like that, then you should look at a situation where the death rate is extremely high and people are dropping like flies and for some reason people are not getting vaccines. But a situation where things are happening and improving and the administration is holding outdoor concerts and telling people they must return to work in person and ending telemedicine visits and sending all this messaging that things are over, the pandemic is over, people must come back, then why would you at that time say that you must have a mandate because things are so bad? You're sending two separate, completely distinct messages at the same time.
Okay, so let's bring that home. If you succeed and you raise your hand and are sworn in on January 1st, what will you then bring to the conversation? What do you think the city should do?
I would end the mandate for many reasons. I think that we should talk to people. I'm not against the vaccine, so let me make that clear. I'm not against the vaccine, but I think that you should try to talk to people and convince them to do something. That's the role of government, you know. We make things available for people, and as a doctor and a scientist, I think that we should talk to people and give them their risks, benefits, and alternatives to begin with, and then let them make the decisions about what they want to do. Now, there is public health. I mean, think about all these other situations where we have to consider the public, right? But in terms of our studies and everything else going on, we have to look at, well, with the vaccine, are you protecting yourself? Are you protecting the public? And really make that data and that analysis clear. And right now, a lot of people have lost confidence because we have a lot of back and forth with the FDA.
But I mean, so I want to move on. But is this different from you know, what young parents like you have to go through with, you know, measles, rubella, smallpox, and so forth? Or do you favor having like a long conversation to try and persuade people about that? Or is this different from all of the other vaccines?
This is different from the others.
Why is that?
Because I think those have had a 20-year track record before the vaccine became mandatory. So you have 20 years of data versus this one where you have a new vaccine and people are more skeptical. So if people were not skeptical, I think there's a difference. But when you have so many people that are so upset and you already have a loss of confidence and a loss of trust in the government, forcing people to do something, it creates a lot of animosity. So then even aside from the mandate, when you want to get other things done, you have a problem. Even now we have people who've quit their jobs and our city is having a problem addressing all these critical issues. It's having a problem in terms of the schools. Kids with disabilities cannot get the care they need.
No, I got
People
it.
cannot get home health aids.
I got it. And just for the record, you'd have been comfortable if we had a different policy here and we'd like sort of let whoever felt like coming into the studio tonight be here?
Well,
we have a vaccine mandate here. You either get vaccinated or you don't come in.
Yes. I mean, to me, if somebody's not vaccinated, that would be okay. I would have come to the studio for this debate, yes.
Okay. Let's move on to the topic of Rikers Island. Yesterday, we learned of a 14th person who died this year while in the custody of the Department of Correction on Rikers Island. The fate of the island will undoubtedly be a major issue over the next 4 years. Do you support the current plan as it stands now, which is to close the jail complex and replace it with new or rebuilt facilities elsewhere in the city, close to the borough courthouses, with the exception of Staten Island? Mr. Williams, let's start with you.
Having visited that island and saw what I saw, the difference between even May when it was bad and September when it was literally a humanitarian crisis that I don't think someone can understand until they saw it. Even our Republican council members saw it, thought we were talking hyperbolically, and realized that we weren't. So we have to get that island closed. There are one or two borough-based jails that I think we may want to look at, but as a whole, we have to close it. And we have to change how we look at the criminal justice system. And what's happening on Rikers is dangerous for everyone involved, for people on both sides of those bars, the people who are housed there and the people who work there, including our correction officers, who have been sounding the alarm for a very long time, who are primarily black and brown, who are primarily women. Both sides of those bars come from the same communities, and I feel like if they didn't, we wouldn't be in this situation.
Right. So based on where we are now with the plan that the next administration is going to inherit, do you support the current plan with or without amendments, or do you have something else in mind?
I think we have to go forward with the plan. There might be some things that we can look at, but this is a hard thing to hash out. I don't know that this city should go through hashing out again. I think we've got to a place we should look at a couple things, but we have to move forward.
Okay. Dr. Debbie.
Well, Rikers is a disaster. I've tried to visit there as a member of the public, as a member of the press. I went there yesterday to try to drive there, but I was turned away at the bridge. And I have people from law enforcement volunteering on my campaign, related to the corrections officers, related to the prisoners volunteering on my campaign. I have a parolee who just was released from Rikers also volunteering on my campaign. The reason they're all with me is because they understand that this happened on your administration's watch, on your watch. And so how do you create such a lose-lose-lose situation with this mismanagement, that basically the staffing was too low and also mismanaged and misassigned, which there too, again, with proper management of the IT, which you have the resources through COPIC, that commission that you are actually the head of, but that you haven't commissioned in 3 years, that you actually could figure out what's going on there and maybe correct the management, but that, you know, the corrections officers are upset, getting raped, assaulted. The prisoners have the same thing to undergo. The medical staff have left. So people who come to me, they also are in recovery services, addicts, people who are struggling with substance abuse. They cannot get the treatment that they need, and they're suffering as well. But more than that, these people, the prisoners and the parolees, they have families. They have loved ones that they want to keep safe, and they don't think that what you have done, going back to the earlier topic, in terms of crime and guns and violence, the entire public is at risk. So even if they are in prison, or even if they have just been released from prison, they would rather support me because they think that this administration has created such a dangerous and disastrous situation in this city.
So I'd love to hear what data COPIC should have put out that would have helped with this. And I'm not sure if there's the best understanding of the role of the public advocate, but I'm happy to lay out all of the tools that we have. And I very much have used those tools to the best of our capability. We don't have the tools to actually get the decisions that we want to be done. If we did, we wouldn't be in this situation. But what we have done is very effectively raise this issue time and time again, call out the leaders who have the power, like the mayor, like the governor, who are the ones that actually failed during this process that we're in right now.
Well, you are the second most powerful person in the city. So saying that the mayor is responsible for everything and calling him out on social media, I mean, an influencer can do that, and so can a lot of the members of the press. But in your case, you actually have the mayor's director of operations on this COPIC commission that you can call. You have access to, you know, all of these folks within IT that are under that umbrella. So if you think about all the problems within IT, well, the vaccine website, website, to be able to sign up for the vaccine, as we were talking about. I am in favor of that. So many people struggled with that. I was trying to volunteer my office and my resources to give out the vaccine. That also, people struggled with IT. Rikers Island, they are struggling with staffing and figuring out their IT. These are things that you cannot fix the entire problem, but you could address potentially, or have the tools to address some of the critical problems that might be able to address that.
If elected, what would you do that would be
Well,
different?
I would do that first. I would get the IT team together. I would convene COPIC immediately, and whatever budget we have in the Public Advocate's office, I would use it to address that immediately.
You would cut other parts of the office to fund COPIC? Is that the idea?
No, I wouldn't cut the other parts. COPIC is part of the office. That's already included in the office. It's a convening of different members for the team, people who have power within the city.
Yeah, well, in fact, we're throwing acronyms around. Why don't you explain for us what COPIC is and why it has never really come into existence?
It's the Commission on Public Information. I do think it's a very important role to try to play, but it actually is not funded, and so there is no funding for it. We are trying very hard to do it without a budget, but we would have to cut another part of the office to get it done. But what we have done is get data. And when we have the data, we put it all on a report so people can see. I'm not sure what data you would get that would have helped Rikers, but we do very much focus on data, and our tech team, and as a matter of fact, our head of data is very much focused on COPIC, and we're trying to get the funding needed to make sure that we make it into a real thing, which is why no previous public advocate has been able to actually get it done, because we don't get the money that's needed. As soon as I got off Rikers Island, I actually called directly the mayor and called the governor. And so we did do that to get that in action. And again, the tools that we have as a public advocate, which I'm happy to lay out, we have used excessively to raise issues, pass bills, issue reports, get policies changed, and get projects funded. We're very proud of the work that we've done in actually just 2.5 years.
Okay, let's continue on a different aspect of public safety. The public advocate appoints a member to the Civilian Complaint Review Board, which is that 15-member body that recommends discipline for officers, including a report this week that they issued about dozens of police officers whose conduct connected to the protest was found to have been abusive in some cases and worthy of further investigation and perhaps sanctions. Do you think that there, in general, are individual bad officers or making poor decisions, or is there a systemic problem, especially when it comes to policing protests? Dr. Debbie.
Well, I think that this is a very complicated issue. So first of all, there are individual bad actors. That's true anywhere. But then when there are systemic issues, I think that's the job of the public advocate to analyze and look to see if there are. So to me, I don't understand why when there's protests, you wouldn't have the unit where the police are on horses actually managing the protests. Now, my understanding is that the mayor could have deployed those units, and actually that might have kept things under better control. That's the riot control unit. So we might have avoided a lot of this if things were handled appropriately at that point. So to have so much mismanagement and then blame the last domino is, to me, ridiculous. But that's what I have seen time and time again in this administration, that there are so many factors. Even when I think of other incidences, let's say that situation where that repeat offender had attacked that elderly Asian woman on the street, people blame the doorman that didn't come to help her, but they didn't look at all the reasons. Why is this person out on the street in the first place? What were all the laws that were put into place to lead to this incident, or all the defunding and bail reform and everything else that led to this incident happening? Instead, they punished this doorman who was a bystander at that point. So I think the same thing should be looked at in terms of these incidents here. Of course, they have to be addressed, but we have to look at the whole picture.
Okay.
I would say first, the only agency that wasn't defunded was probably the NYPD. All the other ones were, especially during the pandemic. And I would say, I don't think the answer to what we saw, people protesting over policing, was additional more police. I do believe that there was mismanagement here. And I do believe that this conversation is failing everybody. It's failing the police officers who don't have the tools to solve all of our problems. Sadly, it is failing the communities who do need that service, but who have to understand that public safety simply can't be equated with policing, that public safety has a lot of other components to it that those communities have not seen in a long time. They haven't seen it funded, they haven't seen it structured. And so many of those communities are squeezed between very real over-policing and very real street violence. And if they complain about over-policing, then they get under-policing. And what we need is a leader who can have that conversation without the fear-mongering that comes with it, because we need to keep people safe.
Well, I agree with that, but then I think I'm that leader as opposed to you, because you have had that position for 3 years and that hasn't happened.
Well, what has happened in those 3 years is a global pandemic. I don't think I'm responsible for the spike in gun violence and murders across the nation. What I would say, the very people who are pointing out the policies that we've pushed for are referencing 2018 and 2019. And it's almost hypocritical, because if you go back to that time, they were blasting those policies at that time. If you go back to 2010, 2009, which is where we are in shooting and murders now, if you're a victim of crime, by the way, data means nothing. But when we said we can decrease those things while treating communities humanely, we were fought every step of the way, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and we were correct. We became the safest city we'd ever been in 2018, 2019 by lowering arrests, lowering stops, putting funding into community groups that knew what they were doing, and beginning to have a holistic point of view. If we weren't fought the whole way and actually made that infrastructure real, we might have been able to survive the pandemic the way certain other cities did, who actually were bought into that way of thinking.
Okay. I want to ask about a particular public safety issue. And Mr. Williams, yours was a prominent voice calling for school safety agents to be removed from public schools, or at a minimum placed under the supervision of the Department of Education rather than the NYPD. Now, the union that represents the agents has pointed out that 90% of the agents are Black and Latino, 70% are women, a workforce that basically reflects the student body. So far this year, there have been several violent incidents, including a stabbing inside the library at FAMNY Lou Hamer Freedom High School, 2 teens stabbed outside of Harry S. Truman High School. Eric Adams has said that if elected, he would reassess school safety issues. Do you support a reassessment of where things are now, and what role, if any, do you think school safety agents should have in keeping our kids safe?
I've always supported a true and real assessment. Unfortunately, some of the unions have always misconstrued things that I've said. I've always made clear that I would never support a plan that fires 5,000 Black and brown people, particularly women. I would say those crimes and those violent incidents in those schools are terrible. I would also point out they probably had school safety agents at those schools, and it's not their fault that those things happened. So we need to look at safety and what keeps people safe, and the role that those agents can play in a new model, a model that's not focused on where we've been focused in such many years. If that plan could have worked, we probably wouldn't be here right now. And so we have a report, again, at advocate.nyc.gov that lays out our whole school safety plan so people can't continue to misconstrue what it is I've said and how we have to move forward. We want to move to a restorative justice model, which everyone understands that that is an evidence-based model, because what we want is the schools to be safe. I also want the communities to be safe as well.
When we hear that something like 2,700 weapons are recovered from schools in a given school year, it sounds like a high number. It sounds like something that would require a lot of attention and probably a lot of personnel, a lot of school safety agents. Does your report and your thinking include that very real danger presented to a lot of kids?
It does. It addresses all of the danger. It even says that some of the posts that school safety agents have now should continue under the restorative justice model. Mm-hmm. What we can't have is a modeling that is under the NYPD, because there are issues wrought there. And we need to look at a restorative justice model that will help prevent those people to come into the schools in the first place. And that's the kind of thinking we have to have. If we keep responding, we're never going to get to the root of the problem. So I don't want those kids to bring those weapons to school. I also don't want them to use them when they get out of school. And so we have to have a model that really drives that home. And the current model, the way we use school safety agents, isn't working. Mm-hmm. And we've seen models across the state and across the country that have a lot of promise. Just in Schenectady, they have a model that we're hoping to go visit really soon to take a look at.
Okay. Dr.
Well,
Daly.
that sounds like you're campaigning for governor again, but I was going to say that in terms of the schools, I already have patients who are keeping their kids home from school because they're afraid. They don't want their kids to die, but then it makes me wonder what's happening for these kids in terms of their education. I also wonder, with all these missing kids from school, you know, how do we know if some of them are being kidnapped, if some of them are being trafficked, or what's happening? I've treated kids who are the victims of child abuse and sexual abuse. On top of that, I'll say that there are other ideas, things that we could do for these kids, which a Democrat, Harriet Hines, who ran for city council, approached me with her idea about creating a youth council so that we could actually incorporate kids, mentor them, which I have done throughout my career, but mentor them in the public advocate's office for free, because kids look for those types of opportunities and ask them for their solutions and send them back to their schools. So you could empower kids, help them with their resumes, give them opportunities, and actually hear their solutions for how to address things. But again, this is a person from the other side who came to me because people find me to be perhaps more receptive to ideas from all different sides.
Well, anyone who knows me knows I'm always receptive. I just want to be clear that traveling doesn't mean you're running for office. And throughout my career as an elected official, I know that I don't have all the answers. So I've always traveled to places, try to figure out what people are doing. Whether it was I started a national network to combat gun violence, I went to Detroit, I went to Cleveland to bring other council members in. In the city council as a public advocate, we went to New Jersey. I'm not trying to run for anything in New Jersey, to meet with Ross Baraka in Newark, New Jersey, because during the pandemic, he had no increase in shootings and no police shootings. And I needed to know what happened. It was interesting what he said. We said we're doing what you're doing in New York. The primary difference was that we had buy-in with the mayor, we had buy-in with the police commissioner, and we had buy-in with the public safety director, which the police commissioner reports to. There was actually an infrastructure that broadened out who looks at the crime numbers, who looks at all the numbers, who responds. That's what we have to do as leadership, is move around and see what's working and see what's not. And I think it's done a great service. It's how we helped get the city to where we were in 2018 and 2019. And we have to continue to do that because, as you pointed out rightfully, gun violence is up. And we need our communities to be safe.
Okay, let's move on, candidates. It's time now for our second lightning round. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Each candidate will respond briefly, usually with yes or no. Dr. Devi, do you consider placard abuse a big problem?
Yes.
Mr. Williams?
Yes.
Which social media platform is your favorite? Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, which one?
I have not started using TikTok yet, but all the rest are very important.
Okay.
Facebook.
Facebook. The current mayor is a Red Sox fan. Do you support the Yankees, the Mets, or another team, Dr. Devi?
I don't, I'm like a mom, so all equal.
Okay.
You know, I'm a basketball fan, so Knicks, I bleed blue and orange, and I was born in Brooklyn. The Mets are my team.
Yes, thank you. That is the correct answer, of course. Jumaane Williams, would New York have been better off if the Amazon development in Long Island City had gone through?
Not as it was proposed.
Dr. Devi.
I think we should have had a discussion about the jobs that could have been proposed. I think we also need to look more carefully at Amazon creating all these robotic jobs where people don't pay payroll tax. So if we did something to incentivize companies like that to hire people rather than robots, we might have a lot more jobs here.
That was a long answer. I just want to say,
Sorry.
I actually would love to use those incentives to some of the small businesses that already exist right here, because I think they'd be happy to have them as well and build the same jobs.
Okay. Dr. Devi, what previous public advocate or other elected official do you consider a model for you?
Tish James.
I actually think about my heroes when I was young, and I'm sorry, this is the real answer, whether it was Spider-Man, X-Men, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. Those were people that stood up for folks who had no voice, and that's what I always think about in the work that I do.
Okay.
All right, well, since that was a longer answer, then I'll say Mariska Hargitay from SVU.
Okay. The actress or the character?
Oh, the character.
Okay,
well,
good.
both, actually. I've seen the actress, too. I thought
Fair
she was
enough.
impressive, too.
For both of you, when was the last time you ate at a restaurant, and was it indoors or outdoors? Mr. Williams.
It was outdoors. It was, we had some Japanese sushi.
Dr. Devi.
I don't remember, but I was at the deli just earlier today,
There
so
you go.
Corner Deli.
Have you been to a movie or concert this year, Dr. Devi, and what was it?
I can't recall, but I don't think so. I've been too focused on the campaign and treating patients.
Okay.
I went to all the outdoor hip-hop concerts that the mayor had, and I had to relent masked up fully, make sure everyone was vaccinated. But my wife loves James Bond, and I had to make an exception to go see the James Bond movie.
Yes, it was a bit of a disappointment, wasn't it? We'll talk about that another time. Should the outdoor dining sheds be made permanent?
I think that's not a yes or no answer, but I do believe we have to do everything we can to help our restaurants, and we have to understand we have a finite space, and we have to have that conversation.
The way it's asked, the momentum is, unless somebody does something, they're going to be permanent.
Yeah, they need to be there for now, but we have to have a conversation. We can't leave these restaurants in limbo.
We need something predictable with that street space so that the restaurants, the bikers, the pedestrians, the cars, they have something that they can plan for instead of always having chaos back and forth in between.
Okay, you may have a short answer for this, but it's a big question. With major budget deficits looming, what agency do you think should be examined as a possible place to make cuts, Dr. Debbie?
To make cuts, it's more about the mismanagement, so I think we should look at all the different agencies and see.
Pick one.
Fine, Department of Transportation.
There you go.
Just having worked on the budget, there's just a lot of spaces, and a lot of them have to do with some massive contracts that occur in different places. Unfortunately, DOE is one of them, but they do need money. But we have to look at a lot of the item budgets that are really large and dig into it. Of course, there's been conversations about the NYPD, but the real conversation is who needs the funding, who hasn't gotten it, who has gotten the majority of the funding.
What's an agency that requires a little more scrutiny, do you think?
Well, I think, so I always think like the NYPD has access to unlimited overtime. They may need it, but something like the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene does not. Why is that? What if they did have overtime to deal with some of the mentally ill folks who were in the street?
Okay, it's a lot of lightning, but I get it. Let's talk education. The end of a term announcement by Mayor de Blasio that he wants the Department of Education to phase out the Gifted and Talented program has further fueled an emotional debate. That also includes the conversation about specialized high schools. Supporters say that Gifted and Talented programs, especially among elementary school kids, helps to promote segregation. Supporters of the mayor's policy. Critics say that some students need enhanced learning, and they want somebody to advocate on their behalf. Choices have to be made. The public advocate will be in this conversation. So should the next mayor keep the G&T program, do away with it, or make some alterations? Let's start with you, Dr. Debbie.
So if we had a life-saving medication and only 1% of people had access to it, we would do everything we could to make it more accessible to everybody. We wouldn't destroy it so that nobody could have it. So that's how I see the Gifted and Talented program and the specialized high schools, that this is something that gives kids from low-income neighborhoods a chance, opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise have. We should be doing everything possible to expand that. But this is how this current administration, which the incumbent is part of, views things, that it removes these opportunities from kids rather than giving kids more. And we need to do more in terms of non-traditional education, to do more for kids with disabilities, people who have special needs as well, and try to help all children achieve their potential.
You know, having come through the G&T program, having come through specialized high school, I remember vividly what I had access to and other students didn't. And that was a problem for me even back then. What's most important, I think, is people understanding the damage of telling a 4-year-old that they're gifted and talented and telling another that they're not. And so we need to have leadership that will have this conversation and have people understand that doing away with the system the way it is does not mean that students who need and should have accelerated learning won't have it. What it will be is the process in which they get that accelerated learning that they should have. Right now, the process that exists, which unfortunately was made worse by a prior administration, doesn't allow for that, and it actually is hyper-segregated. So I'm thankful that the mayor pushed this conversation. It wasn't a profile in courage. I think the conversation should have happened much earlier in the administration so that we could have had a lot of these questions already answered instead of hurried to the end where we know people are going to be anxious because everybody wants their child to have access to the best education. And we have a way to do that. This does not fully separate people and tell them, you're so much better than this other student.
Okay. Let's talk finally about legislation. One of the specific powers of this office is the right to introduce legislation and to serve as an ex officio member of all city council committees. If elected, what would be your priority for new legislation to pass in the coming year? Dr. Debbie.
Well, as I mentioned, I think one of the biggest problems we have is trust and confidence in the government. And I think that comes from us being preyed upon relentlessly by con artists, especially, with auto warranty dealers, all of this. We have, every day I get calls from somebody pretending to be a government agent. So what we need to do is coordinate some kind of algorithm. What I would do is basically work with the NYPD, call the 311 operators, work with the district attorney's office, and come up with an algorithm that we could introduce also into legislation to make it clear for people that we're going to take this seriously and address these con artists. So that people can start to have some more confidence and not just accept being conned as a way of life. We have people who are vulnerable, people who are younger and older, just completely losing confidence in the entire system.
Amen to that. Mr. Williams.
I'm proud of the work we've done so far, a lot more to go. As I mentioned, we passed 14 pieces of legislation so far, legislation that protects women in the workplace, that helps tenants, that helps homeowners. And thankfully, we've been able to do that with our colleagues in the City Council. We have a few packages right now, one on Black maternal health, which has actually become very personal to me, and one on trans New Yorkers and the health that they need, especially Black trans women. We're hoping to see if we can get that done during the next 2 months, but it's likely not. And so we want to make sure that in the next term, early on, we can get those passed. Very important, or continuing the conversations around public safety. We can't let that go. Thankfully, it's starting to trend in the right direction. But again, if you're a victim of crime, that data means nothing. We know what works, and we really have to push it, and you have to have the courage to continue to do that. And we need somebody in the public advocate's office that can do that. And I'm hoping if I can get the vote of New Yorkers another time to get reelected, to do that as a public advocate.
For both of you, to the extent that the public advocate is intended to be a check on the mayor and to a certain extent the city council, what kind of relationship do you have with Eric Adams and Curtis Lewa, and what's an area where you would foresee needing to maybe differ with them, hold them accountable, or otherwise steer their intended priorities? Mr. Williams.
I have a pretty decent relationship with Eric Adams as the borough president. I don't think Curtis and I see eye to eye on many things, but we have cordial conversations. I will always say that the job of the public advocate isn't either to come in as a friend or an adversary. The job is to make sure the people of the city of New York are getting their needs attended to by government. And so when the mayor is doing that, I have a history of walking with the mayor and applauding and pushing him to continue to do that. I also have a history of when that's not happening, being very vocal about it and pushing the mayor to do the right thing. And we have some tough fights, and we have some tough victories on that. And we've used all the tools in the toolbox, from being in the street to passing legislation to get that done. And I foresee, if I get the honor of being public advocate again, doing that the next administration.
Okay, Dr. Devi, same question. What are you hearing from the mayoral candidates that makes you think, when I'm public advocate, I may have to go a couple of rounds with them?
Well, I don't know Eric Adams, but Curtis Lewa, I have a good relationship with him. I would say, same as Jumani, that it's really more to me about the data and the analysis. So it's not, to me, so much what they're saying, but what the data would show. And as public advocate, you have access to a lot of that data. What I've noticed, though, as a serious problem, especially when I looked at NYCHA and HPD documents, is that there's a lot of information that's just completely redacted. So there's no way to really tell. There's no transparency in that system. So the first thing I would do is fight that, to be able to see what are the alternatives. We saw that in a lot of the rezoning documents for the East River project that's going on in Soho and NoHo. So the first thing I would do, which I testified against, by the way, but I would look at that and then use that to convince either candidate of my position and work with them and try to bring them to my side.
Okay. I think that brings us to the end of our time. That is going to do it for this debate. I want to thank both candidates for joining us tonight. And if you missed any part of this, you can watch it in its entirety on the Spectrum News app or at ny1.com. You can also find our other debates there. Tune in later this week. I'll be holding and hosting debates for City Council District 32 in Queens and for City Controller. And of course, please remember to vote. Early voting begins this Saturday, and Election Day is coming up on Tuesday, November 2nd. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great evening.